Okay, we're doing this again. We are sharing an unfortunate life event for the sake of communicating a lesson and hopefully teaching you all to be proactive about your health and maybe not believe some misconceptions that I believed going forward. And I don't really know where to start with this, so we're going to start at the beginning. And that would be, hi, if you don't know who I am, my name's Evie. I am asexual. And that means I don't have a typical relationship to human intimacy that 98+% of the planet likely experiences, if we're going off of the number of like 1 to 2% of the population being ace. And that, combined with some of the things that were commonly said during my upbringing, I think led me to a very unfortunate point. And I was raised Catholic. I was raised in a couple of different school systems across the country, and my sex ed was varied, but ultimately tended to boil down to here's what a baby looks like, and also terrifying photos of STIs. Feel afraid, children. Do not do intercourse. It is bad and scary. That was basically what I got the majority of the time. Pleasure, intimacy, connection, how to make your body feel good, any of that, not really part of the conversation. As far as I can remember, I was horrified the entire time, mostly trying to read a book under my desk, so I might have missed that side note in the middle of all the horrifying STI pictures. But I believed for a very long time, until recently, that pain on some level during sex is a normal experience that almost everyone will have at least some of the time. Now, I have read all the same articles y'all have probably read. I know that when you look up advice about this kind of thing on the internet, almost always it will say somewhere in there, pain is not normal. If it feels painful for you, talk to a doctor. And I didn't believe that. Because in my head, I believed that pain might not be the normal experience, but the reason why I was experiencing it was because I'm ace, I don't really get into it that often, I don't have the same biophysiological response to this that other people would, and so naturally, of course, it is going to feel bad some of the time, most of the time, and that is how my life is going to be if I choose to have relationships with other people who are not also ace and want to do dirty things in order to bond in the relationship. I just assumed this was my lot in life. And over the last couple of years, as I have been pursuing different relationships, I have had people comment before on the pain that I have experienced, and they've told me it's not normal, but I didn't necessarily believe them, and then we kept doing things, and so didn't really seem to be that big of a deal, although I guess the red flag siren going by is trying to tell past me that it in fact was a big deal and I should have been paying more attention. So I had this experience over the past couple of years where I went from pain being an occasional occurrence to an almost all the time thing. Like excruciating, terrible pain. I would bleed occasionally, which I attributed to maneuvering, and I do think that was part of it because now that I have an arm implant instead, the bleeding has basically stopped, but there were a lot of warning signs I should have been paying more attention to. And I went on this slope where slowly over time, everything kept getting more painful more often, and I thought it was maybe the duration of the relationship, me being less excited about things, the particular acts, something about my partner I was doing it with, the toys. Like, I didn't really know what to attribute it to. And it turns out there was one very obvious answer that I wasn't looking at. And a couple of months ago, back in January, there was a particular experience that happened where I had really tried to make it a pleasurable experience, tried my hardest to make it be a good time, and even then, it was still awful and I didn't like it at all. It felt like my body was betraying me. It felt like I was doing everything I could with my brain. I followed all of the rules in terms of warming up beforehand and foreplay and snuggling and feeling connected and doing all of that stuff, using lube, using toys, doing everything every website tells you to do, that if you are having typical intercourse issues, should really help ease the process and make it better for both parties. But alas, even that was doing nothing for me. And so after this particular event, one of my partners eventually said, "Hey, this really is not normal. I think you need to go to a doctor." And I just thought, what is a doctor gonna tell me that I don't already know? What could they possibly find out? Because a couple of years ago, when a bunch of things were going on in my life that were new, I went to a doctor and I talked to them about the bleeding I was experiencing during sex, and they basically told me, tell your partner to not go so hard next time and use more lube. And that did seem to help a little bit, but it never really solved the problem. And again, I assumed that the bleeding was mostly or entirely because of the NuvaRing. I genuinely don't know what the answer to that is at this point, which will become clear in a moment. And so I'll go to the doctor, we'll figure it out, okay. And I went to go make an appointment with Planned Parenthood, and I didn't really even know what to put in terms of, am I going there for pain? Am I going for a yearly exam? Because when you go online to make an appointment, depending on which thing you select, their availability is very different. And I ended up being able to make an appointment for, I want to say, a couple days to a week later at the end of January. And I went into this thinking it could be something, but I was pretty sure it wasn't anything. I was almost entirely confident I was going to be told the same thing I was before, which was try more lube, try more foreplay, don't go so hard. Basically, that's all we can do for you. There's not really a lot that can be done for consistent pain during sex, especially because as an ace person, I'm not experiencing that desire or arousal that makes your vaginal canal lengthen and all the other things happen, which can make a huge difference between sex that feels good and sex that doesn't. And I went there for my appointment, I got all checked in, and I started to see the medical professional that was seeing me. I described what my problem was, what I thought was probably going on there, and they said, okay, great. Also looks like you said you wanted to do a pap smear. You got one 2 years ago. Not necessary at this point, came back normal, but we'll do a physical exam and see what happens. And this is why I filmed this video second today, is because I was like, at some point, I'm going to get choked up and emotional, and I might ruin my makeup. So when she started to do the exam, and if you don't know how this works, typically when they're doing a pelvic exam, there's an external exam with hands, there's an internal exam also with fingers, and then if they're doing a pap smear or something like more intense, they will also use a speculum and do a second type of exam using that. And Planned Parenthood, I've talked about before, they are very good, very communicative in terms of what they're doing, when they're doing it. I have never felt violated by a Planned Parenthood employee, anyone like that. As far as that's concerned, and bedside manner, top notch. The experience, though, was very uncomfortable, and I have memories of getting previous pelvic exams done where, like, I didn't really feel anything. So I knew that that wasn't normal. And then she started to kind of like feel around the outside, try to figure out like what was going on. She, I think, also did this thing where they like move your cervix a little bit with their fingers, which I don't even, how do you even do that? I don't know. And that was also very painful. Like, it was just a bad time all the way around. And then she decided, okay, I do still think we want to do a pap smear here because this is not normal, this amount of pain. So I guess it was nice to sort of start with the validation of like the pain itself wasn't normal, and she could see some things visually that were not normal on my cervix. And I remember looking up the term here, and she told me she saw some things that look like what are called Nablothian cysts, I believe is how it's said. And they are basically a reaction that can occur on the surface of your cervix. And one of the main reasons why they happen is because of previous or existing infection or irritation or injury. Now, I'd never heard of them before, which is why I'm telling you about them, because more information is good. So I did have what looked like to be a couple of cysts on one side. My cervix apparently just looked really inflamed and angry, and then I also had this like other marking, and they actually like did a whole diagram of my cervix and like where everything was on it and what looked bad about it. They described it in like millimeters and all this, very scientific. And there was another section of my cervix that looked abnormal, and she couldn't quite tell what it was. It could have been a couple of different things. Could be just normal variation in tissue, could be a polyp, could be inflammation from something else, could be a lot of different things, and they wouldn't necessarily know. But there was one thing in that exam that even before doing the pap smear, she was pretty sure that I had, which is something called pelvic inflammatory disease. And if you don't know what that is, I have a packet for you to read. So a lot of people's understanding of pelvic inflammatory disease, I want to say, is from Trisha Paytas, who I believe said that she had it from chlamydia or gonorrhea or something. And it was generally thought previously that the majority of PID cases were because of infection from an STI. It turns out in reality, that's not really what necessarily causes PID. Basically, I'm going to read off of this a little bit, and we're all going to be educated about what PID is. So PID is a serious infection of your uterus and tubes. It can cause permanent damage to them. Sweet. It can cause long-term pain, it can make it difficult to get pregnant, and it can increase the pregnancy risk of an ectopic pregnancy. Also, very cool. See Abelina Sabrina's video about why ectopic pregnancies are really scary. If you, for some reason, also want to watch that after watching this. There can be some symptoms, like pain and bleeding with sex, bleeding between periods, burning when you urinate, belly pain or cramps, fever or chills, and then bad smelling discharge. Now, I had a lot of these. I definitely had the pain and bleeding during sex, though the bleeding stopped when I stopped using my NuvaRing as much, or like when it had been out for a while, I didn't bleed as much. I had been experiencing some random like stomach, lower pelvic pain randomly, which I understood to be a common-ish side effect of having the arm implant that didn't follow any kind of bleeding, penetration, any sort of activity. It would kind of just randomly come and go. And then that was basically what I ended up experiencing. Now, the way that you treat PID is why I'm making this video, because I really want people to know about this. This is a serious infection that if you do not catch it and treat it, can end very badly for you. Essentially, and I'm going to put something up on screen that describes it better than I can verbally right now, it is very easy for that infection to eventually spread to other parts of your body, get into your bloodstream, and cause you to go, I believe, septic. That's not a good thing. That's really freaking scary. So I'm very glad that they caught it. But the way that they treat it is they inject you initially. This is in America. There are some differences in treatment for PID between countries. In America, they start by injecting you in the hip with an injection of antibiotics. Never had that before. Was markedly less painful than the exam was. But it was on the road to recovery. Now, actually, before I get into talking about the antibiotics more, I do want to say that also getting the pap smear done was a pretty bad time, but I am glad that I got it done. It was necessary. It was invasive. I hate speculums. Anybody that has a fetish for speculums, please tell me why, because I just even thinking about a speculum is like, oh, absolutely no go at this point for me, because as the story will progress, you will discover that this is not the only time I end up with a speculum in me. Oh no, we are at the very beginning here. So I get the first injection. I get prescribed 2 antibiotics to take twice a day for 2 weeks. So 4 antibiotic pills, 2 in the morning, 2 in the evening, every day for 2 weeks. I go out to my car. I cry from a combination of relief and despair, because with PID, it is very hard to tell how long the infection has been going on for or how extensive it might be. I didn't really know what to expect, and if after a couple of days the antibiotics weren't working, I was going to have to go to the hospital for further treatment. Didn't really want to do that. So I went home. I rested for a bit because I was definitely very crampy after the exam. And I waited to be able to pick up my other oral antibiotics from the pharmacy. I called later in the evening to try and pick up my prescription. The automatic voice message thing you can check to see if your thing is ready told me that it wasn't ready to be filled yet and wouldn't be filled for another day. And I panicked about that because I'd already started the antibiotic treatment with a shot. So what would happen if I couldn't take both pills at the same time? Because one was ready and the other one wasn't. And I called them, I explained the scenario. They were eventually able to fill my prescription both at the same time, but it was very nerve-wracking. And so I started on this course of taking antibiotics, and there is a laundry list of things you are not supposed to take on these antibiotics. It makes it very difficult to have anything to eat or drink around having these pills. And I also just didn't want to mess up the pills being fully absorbed if I ate too much or drank the wrong thing. And so I was fasting for quite a while before and afterwards, which was recommended on a couple of the websites and also by the label on the medication. Fun fact about me that doesn't usually come up is I am allergic to tetracyclines. And when I was in high school, was prescribed minocycline? I believe that was the one I was prescribed. And that one, actually very funnily, interrupted my end of year exams, and I didn't know that I was having an allergic reaction because I took the pill for like 4 days, and my hands would get swollen and itchy and sweaty, and like, oh, it was just, and like I would just feel all weird all over. Like even just touching the pill would make me itchy. And after 4 or 5 days of that, I put together the dots and went, oh, I think I might be allergic to this. And so I stopped taking it because it was for acne, and like I didn't have to keep taking it. And that was not really a good time. One of the mainline antibiotics for treating PID in the US is doxycycline, which is a different tetracycline. So I am also having to take, in addition to all this other medication, I am also taking the antihistamine every day. which even the non-drowsy ones make me extremely drowsy. Non-drowsy's a lie. It's not true. It's a marketing thing. It can definitely still make you drowsy. I did talk to my prescriber when I started to take the medication about what my reactions were. They were much more mild compared to minocycline. I was getting a lot of like water retention and swelling in my face and my hands, not nearly as severely as the other one I've taken before, but it very much was still there. And it was well managed by taking an antihistamine, and so they advised that unless I had further issues, to keep taking it with antihistamine, because having a mild reaction like that is fairly common with these kinds of antibiotics. I went in for my secondary checkup with a different doctor than the first one, and thank goodness it did seem like some of the pain was possibly starting to resolve. My infection was not getting worse, it was getting a little bit better, and I was on the road to recovery. I did thankfully not have to go to the hospital for further treatment. Just very, very thankful for that. Now, at that time, the second doctor did tell me that because of the fact this pain can be longer term and it can stick around even after the infection is resolved, it could also be connected along those same lines. Like, I can't remember, how do I say this? Like, part of it was that the pain might not be resolvable, and it's hard to tell when that or if that's going to happen. And also, it could be the case that my pain is also being caused by having pelvic floor issues. I have a very strong pelvic floor. Turns out you can have too much of a good thing or too much of it in the wrong place or something. So, went to the second checkup, got another exam, did all of that, and basically had to keep taking these pills for 2 weeks. And even just thinking about taking those pills is, the relief I felt when I was able to stop taking them was such a burden off of my shoulders. They were so disgusting. I felt nauseous every single day for like 12 hours out of the day when I took them. I almost threw up at least 3 times when I took them. I couldn't sit down when I was taking them. I couldn't bend over. I couldn't do yard work. I couldn't do housework. I couldn't be on my computer. I couldn't be on my phone. I couldn't even watch the television when I was on these. I was so nauseous. The only thing I could do that didn't actively make me feel nauseous most of the time was walking my dog. That was it. That was the only solace I had. Was I eventually, after a week, came up with a plan where I would take the pill in the morning, and then immediately afterwards I would go walk for like an hour just to try to get through the worst of it. And then after an hour I could start to better tolerate standing up and bending over or sitting at a couch or on a chair or something. I feel so much more sympathy now for people that go through severe nausea during a pregnancy. Like, it is so bad. And I honestly wonder if part of the reason why I felt so nauseous is because one of the pills I was taking was huge and it also wasn't coated, which meant that when I was taking it, I had to have it as quickly as possible. Like, I had to slam that thing back, because if it was on my tongue for a millisecond, in my mouth for a millisecond, it would dissolve and I would feel and taste the awful taste of it for at least an hour afterwards, and I don't recommend that. Now, after about a week of taking it, I decided, okay, I can risk having this with like tea or juice because the flavor is awful. I was very cautious. I had some like strong flavored water essentially, and that made it a lot easier to get down. I'm not going to recommend eating or drinking anything with these because that was not recommended to me, but having a flavored water at least does actually help a little bit. And so thankfully I was able to get through taking the antibiotics. It was exhausting and tiring, and I'm sure if you look at the videos I did during that time period or my live streams or anything else, like, I was wrecked for 2 solid weeks. It destroyed my digestive system. I'm not even going to get into that. But I had just the worst possible gastrointestinal issues that I am still recovering from right now because of how badly it messed me up. Like, when you take this level of antibiotics, you are completely defoliating your entire body of all of its flora. All of that's gone. You are getting rid of it. And it was really, really, really hard to get through. So that all happened. And I got through taking the antibiotics. I had to do a follow-up appointment once my antibiotics were all the way through, just kind of seeing what everything looked like at that point. It did still look like I had the cyst that I had. I did still have that other kind of like banana shaped marking of weird tissue on the opposite side, but it didn't seem to be as inflamed and as bad. Now, during all of this, I was pondering, okay, when did this happen? How long has it been going on for? And what I came down to is, I think the beginning of my symptoms were maybe almost 2 years ago. And that's a long time to be having an infection hanging out in your body parts, just doing whatever they want. And I remember when I had gotten a pap smear before, I do remember the technician saying something on the lines of like, oh, looks a little bit more pink than normal, but that's okay. Like, they noticed something was different about my cervix at that time. And was that the beginning of my infection? Was that before, after? I don't know. Was it really 2 years ago? Was it more recent? Is it unrelated? I don't know. But I was very nervous about how long it had been going on in my body for and what the long-term impact of that might end up being. When I went to that second appointment, as we had been talking about beforehand, they did recommend that I get a colposcopy, which, if you don't know what that is, prepare to learn. So a colposcopy is basically like a microscope they use on your cervix to figure out what the cells look like and what's going on in there. And it's a pretty specialized piece of equipment. They usually do it after an abnormal pap smear. Now, my pap smear came back normal, which didn't mean nothing was wrong. It just meant that it probably wasn't from cancer, thank God. It just could be basically anything else at that point. So trying to get an appointment for this colposcopy, though, was also very distressing because I just got it done at the end of March. This started in mid to late January. That's a long time because even from that first appointment, they were recommending that I get a colposcopy. And I kept hearing that. I got on the wait list. I was told it would take about a month. They have an app they use called MyChart for facilitating all of this and making appointments and keeping track of things. And when I was at the appointment and I was getting everything figured out, I thought that I would just be able to use the MyChart, and I was on the wait list on the MyChart. And when I was on MyChart, they ended up taking me off the wait list after I selected an appointment for Saturday. Get a call back eventually. They tell me, oh, we don't do these on Saturdays. We only do them on Wednesdays. So you're not really off the wait list. So I was waiting for an appointment I thought would have been a month sooner than it ended up being. And then that appointment didn't even really exist. So I had to wait again. And I waited and waited and waited. And I didn't think I was actually on the wait list again. So I called a couple times. We figured it out eventually. I definitely got back on the wait list, and I was told to call back around the 15th of the current month because that is when they unlock new appointments for the next month. I ended up getting something for the end of March, as you can tell by the date of this video. And again, it was more waiting, more wondering, because it wasn't really clear to me what could be going on with my cervix, what they would find. And it seemed like there were two simultaneous issues. there was having the PID and also having some issues visually with my cervix that could have been related to the PID, but could also be something else. So, had to get that investigated. Now, before we go on to talking about the colposcopy, I do want to talk about PID, what causes it, all of that kind of stuff. So, I did a lot of research about this because I wanted to know for myself. And one of the things that people wonder about with PID is it caused by having some kind of STI? And that, as I've already said, is something that can cause it. It is not the only cause or even necessarily the majority cause. It is entirely possible to get PID without ever having had any STI whatsoever. It can also be caused by your natural flora in your vagina that's a little bit out of balance, getting shoved up into your uterus from the cervix and causing havoc up there, essentially is what was described to me. And because of that, you might wonder, okay, what about condoms? What about lubricants? How does that play into it? And what I found really interesting is 0% condom use and 100% condom use had a lower rate of recurrent PID, but inconsistent condom use actually increases your risk of recurrent PID, because once you have it once, you are likely to get it again, which comes back to wear a condom, people, please. It is good for a lot of reasons, and this is also one of them. So, recurrent PID, now a new risk for my life, as well as possible permanent pelvic pain. Yay, good stuff. And then I had to get the colposcopy done, which I got done fairly recently in the last week or so, and it was really not a fun time. And in order to be able to use this microscope on you, they have to open you up with a speculum, flush you with acetic acid, which is vinegar. There's 50 swabs they use. I swear to God, they use so many swabs. So I couldn't even cotton ball. I didn't even know what they were all for. But there's lots of that. They put iodine on you. They look at you with the microscope, and this is the really big thing I didn't realize was going to be happening. Now, I hate speculums. That part by itself was awful, horrible. The people who did the procedure, very kind, very supportive. So they're doing the procedure. They're looking at all of it. I'm chatting with them. I have a heating pad over my stomach area to help me relax. I was told to take a pain reliever, an OTC pain reliever, before I came in to help with that. And then turns out, I didn't realize this before the day of the appointment, you get biopsies done most of the time. I thought that was just if you had cervical cancer potentially. Turns out they just do it just to make sure. And so I had to have 4 biopsies done on my cervix. And they did numb me up first with a numbing cream, but it's very strange because how well the cream ended up working was intermittent. 2 of them were not painful at all, and 2 of them were definitely a very strong pinch. Not passing out, fainting, throwing up levels of pain, but very noticeable and definitely not pleasant to have done. Then they swab this mustard looking thing over you, I think to stop the bleeding, that maybe is what it's for, and then it slowly comes out of you after 2 days and looks like coffee grounds, and then you have to wear a pad for the day afterwards because you're still going to keep bleeding probably despite the thing they put on you to stop the bleeding. And then you can't put in a tampon or a diva cup or anything else inside of you, or a toy, a penis, anything, for at least 2 days afterwards. Now, I did get my results back from the colposcopy a couple days ago. I only got it over the MyChart site. Nobody called me about it, so that means that nothing on it is really concerning. It wasn't marked as being concerning. I did find out on the chart, though, that I have chronic and acute cervicitis, which basically means my cervix is always irritated. Now, I find this interesting because I literally don't know what could be causing that. I am very aware of irritants. I'm very proactive about not having them in my life. I use a neutral, unscented, pH balanced, feminine hygiene wash, as they are called. I wear cotton underwear. I don't use spermicides. I use organic, very natural, super not fancy lubricant if I use it. I don't really routinely insert things into my vagina. When I use tampons, I use organic, unbleached tampons. I change them regularly. Like, I don't know what could be causing the irritation going on my cervix. I am not really sure what I'm going to do going forward. I am waiting on a call back from the clinic to get more advice about my results in terms of what else it could be that's causing the irritation, how long it might persist for, the continued pelvic pain that I've been experiencing, and it's, I guess, the end of a very long journey. And the reason why I'm talking about all of this is because I really, really want people to know that pain is not normal during sex. Even for people like me, if you're ace, if you don't really care about sex, if you don't really get aroused by it, you can still have something wrong with you when you are experiencing pain, and it's really important to go get that checked out. You can go to places like Planned Parenthood if you're in the US, where they do have options for low-income people. For me, it was about $30 for each visit, which adds up. It's been like $130 or something worth of visits at this point. So it definitely adds up. But the alternative is getting an infection so bad you go septic and go to the hospital. So I'd recommend going and getting it checked out at least once, talking to somebody about it, and just being proactive, I guess, not tolerating pain and discomfort, because if you're like me, you were socialized to believe that pain and discomfort during sex for women is the default and normal, and people with penises, men, are the ones who enjoy sex, and women are the reluctant recipients, and that's the just normal dynamic, and it does not have to be that way. It just absolutely does not. And yeah, I don't know. I hope something in this was helpful or reassuring. If you're going through this right now, if you think you might be, please go get help. I am here to support you in this. I know that it's scary to go to appointments and have somebody poking and prodding in you and wiping your cervix with like a little spoolie brush and taking little punches of skin out of your cervix. Like, no thank you, I don't like that, but it's also better than the alternative, and it's good to know what's wrong and to be able to fix it. And it is a relief to know that the pain I'm experiencing is, well, first of all, it's not nearly as bad as it was, even though it is kind of sticking around a little bit at this point, but it doesn't have to be the default. It's not the default. It truly is not normal. So please, if you are experiencing any of the symptoms that I am gonna list off again here, belly pain or cramps, fever or chills, bad smelling discharge, pain and or bleeding with sex, bleeding between periods, burning when you urinate, even though those could be caused by other things, you probably want to get it checked out, because it could be a UTI, it could be bacterial vaginosis, it could be lots of things, but all of those are worth getting treatment for. And I am personally now in the process of trying to repair the flora in my body. I have been taking a very expensive, very intense daily probiotic to try and re-regulate myself. I have had issues with regulating my pH balance in my vagina. It's like a whole thing. Nobody needs to know the details of that, but it is something that can be worked on. It can be fixed, and it is a long process, and I wish I would have started it sooner, because the sooner you get treatment, the better the outcome is. And if you want to have kids someday, if you care about that, this is something that can cause fertility issues. They can be resolvable in certain cases, but it's very hard to tell unless you get even more invasive procedures done what the extent of scarring is after a PID infection. I'm just happy I am on the path to recovery. I know what I need to know. I do know from my colposcopy, they basically told me that the like banana shaped cluster of like more inflamed cells is probably a normal variation in cervical cells, and that like my cervix kind of like poofs out a little bit as opposed to like laying flat, I guess, which is also a normal variation, and that depending on the angle of things and probably the infection as well, it can look like it's worse than it really is. So, I don't know. Guess I've got stuff going on. I don't know. This has been a really weird thing to not be able to talk about for like the last 2.5 months or however long it's been. Just truly, truly a weird time. And yeah, your health is important. You're important. Please be proactive. Do not tolerate side effects. Do not tolerate pain, because it genuinely really could be a sign of something being very wrong. So do not ignore it. Not to scare you or anything. It is very treatable. Once it is figured out what it is, they start you right away on treatment, because they take it very seriously. At least in my case, at the clinic I went to, they took it very seriously because it can quickly turn so much worse. So anyways, I think that's gonna be it. I don't even know what to say now. It feels weird to promote things or ask for comments, I guess. I don't know. Like, let's talk about supporting each other in the comments down below, and the importance of health and reproductive health in particular. I don't know. Just, it's not normal. It's not a typical thing to experience, and I really, really want to hammer that home. So anyways, I guess that's this video. If you want to know more about PID and the studies that I read about PID and treatment options and everything, I will link to some things either down below or in a pinned comment. Comment again if you want to. Subscribe, because I normally don't talk about things like this on my channel, but I do talk about health, relationships, sexuality, all of that good stuff. And that's going to be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching this. Thank you so much for your support, and I will talk to you all again soon. Bye.